Afternoon, brothers and sisters, and welcome once again to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show. I'm your weekly host, Brother James Muhammad, and I'm honored to have back on the show my brother and my friend in the mission, Brother Kenneth X.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother James.
Yes. Brothers and sisters, we are Facebook Live, as we usually say. If we make a mistake, blame it on the mind and not the heart. But today we're here, and we're going to discuss a very critical subject as it relates to the black community. We'd like to talk about the new crime bill that was passed the other day. The Senate on Tuesday passed a criminal justice reform bill. They titled it the First Step Act. It passed 87 to 12. What is this new crime bill and how does it affect the black community?
Well, Brother James, first let me thank you once again for having me on. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, and also to be able to share information with our viewership. The crime bill that's just recently passed, what it does is it's a backhanded attempt to a criminal justice reform. Now, the particular bill that's in question is only pertains to federal institutions. Now, the thing about that, Brother James, is this. Most people are incarcerated in state facilities. So only about 13% of the 2.1 plus million people that's incarcerated in America will have a chance to benefit from this bill. And what it does is the incentives for good and honor time, as we call it, or credits off your sentence for good behavior, instead of getting 47 days a year, they're going to get 54. And so what that basically means is every year you get 2 months off. So if you got a 10-year sentence, it takes you 6 years to get a year off of that 10-year sentence. So when you look at it, all the hoopla and whatnot, even though anytime they're trying to do something in the criminal justice realm or criminal justice reform is good, it's not what they're making it out to be. Only a small percentage of the people that's locked up are going to benefit. There's approximately 200,000 people in federal custody. If the president now pardoned every one of them, there'd still be 1.9 plus incarcerated. So that's just puts it in a nutshell. There's some more things in it, but that's the main thing that they're talking about. Once they readjust these individual sentences, it's going to help a lot of people. But once that happens, it's going to be very,
back to normal, huh?
Back to normal, yes.
Brothers and sisters, if you're just now tuning in to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show, I'm sitting here with my brother, student minister Kenneth X of the Prison Reform Ministry of the Nation of Islam. We're taking a look at the new crime bill and what it means to the black community. Brother, as we talk about the crime bill, this is not the first crime bill. Most of our people don't understand the crime bill. They wasn't informed of the first crime bill. Where did the crime bill come from? What is the origination of the crime bill, starting with under the Clinton administration?
Well, that's a good question, because anytime we look at anything that goes on in America, especially dealing with the black community, we have to put it in the proper historical context. Okay. Nothing happens to us as black people in America in a vacuum. Now, when we're dealing with the crime bill that was passed in 1994 under the then Democratic President Bill Clinton, it really was a continuation of what had started in the 60s. Sometimes a person can fool you so long that you think they're doing something for you when they're actually doing something to you.
Okay.
We think that as black people, if we get a Democratic president, liberal Congress, that our lives all of a sudden are going to change. But whether they're Democrat or Republican, whether they're conservative or liberal, black people in America still catch the same kind of hell. The Clinton based his run for presidency off of Richard Nixon. What am I talking about? During the 60s, it was upheaval in America. There was a awakening, a moral awakening, not just with black people, but poor whites with consciousness. Everybody was on the move. There were more assassinations and upheavals and civil unrest in the 60s than any other period in America. Now, during that time, Richard Nixon, we all should be familiar with him. He ran on a platform called Tough on Crime. Tough on crime is just dog whistles for tough on black and brown and poor people in America. That's all it was. Now, what President Nixon did, he came up with this mythical war on drugs. We heard about that before. And during his presidency, he began to institute certain things. He appealed to a voting bloc that was disenfranchised, and that was the white male Southern voter. So let's fast forward to Bill Clinton. The Democrats hadn't been in the House in 8 years. They dealt with Reagan, they dealt with George H.W. Bush. So now the Democrats want to get that White House back, and the strategy was to use the same Southern strategy that Richard Nixon did. So in March 1st, right before the Super Tuesday in New Hampshire, Bill Clinton, who some people erroneously say is the first black president, he went to Georgia, Stone Mountain, Georgia to be exact. Stone Mountain is the seat of the old Confederacy. He stood in front of Stone Mountain Correctional Institute. Him, Al Gore, and 2 other politicians, and they had about 40 black inmates behind him. And that's when he announced his Tough on Crime initiative. Now, that optic shouldn't be missed on us. Here are 4 white politicians standing in a penal facility in front of 40 black inmates, and that signal to the Southern white voter, I'm going to be able to keep them in check. And so that launched Clinton's presidency. A couple years later, the bill was authored by Joe Biden, who was the vice president under President Obama. He authored it, and the Democrat out of Texas by the name, I think it was Brooks, sponsored it. Once this bill was passed, this is what I won't say started the mass incarceration, but it sped it up immensely because of the things that was entitled. And so Clinton played the old race game by appealing to the Southern white voters to get into the presidency on the backs of the black community.
Brother and sister, if you're just now tuning in to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show, I'm Brother James Muhammad, your host. And I'm sitting here with Brother Kenneth X of the Prison Reform Ministry of the Nation of Islam. We're taking a critical look at the new crime bill that was passed 87-12, and they passed it at night.
Yes, sir.
There's not a lot of information about the crime bill, and that's why I invited you on, because we are the information hub for our community.
I want to add, Brother James, on the crime bill that President Clinton, it was called the Clinton-Biden bill in the back rooms of Congress. But the things that was in it, the provisions that was in it, just look at now. Of course, it had an assault weapons ban, but we see, that don't really mean anything. There were some good things as far as the violence against women, but it removed the Pell Grants out of the federal and state institutions.
Now, stop right there. I hope you all are listening now, because these bills come in books like this in very small writing, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So they snuck something in there, right?
Right. It was called the educational, off the exact language, but it was put in 1965 when we were making all of those civil rights movements. They put it in there for the individual who found themselves incarcerated, but during that time they could rehabilitate themselves by going to college, by applying for a Pell Grant and taking classes. And many men who took advantage of that, when they left out, they was able to live productive lives because they had became lawyers, some became teachers, some became social workers, or whatever it was. During this crime bill that Clinton passed, it abolished that. You could not apply for the federal Pell Grant. You can't do it now. Unless you're able to pay for classes or someone offer you something for free, you're just sitting in the jail cell with no opportunity to advance. It also allocated, I want to get the number right.
Okay, yes, sir.
$9.7 billion in federal funding to build prisons. Let that sink in. $9.7 billion. So going in, they said, we're going to have to build a lot more prisons because we're about to have a lot more occupants. And the states who adopted that crime bill, they reaped the benefits of that money. They also put in for 100,000 new police officers, so we know what community they was in. And the more contact you have with the police, the more likelihood you have of being a part of the criminal justice system. And so those are some of the little things that happen that we got to take a look at now that set in motion the problem that we have today.
All right, thank you, Brother Ken. And brothers and sisters, you're tuning in to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show. I'm your host, Brother James Muhammad, and we're discussing the crime bill that was passed 87-12 one lonely Tuesday night while we was asleep or we was caught in sport and play.
Yes, sir.
But Brother Kennan is dissecting it because most people didn't know anything about the Pell Grants. Usually when they pass these bills, most senators and Congress, they don't read deeply into the bill.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right.
So now we're dealing with this. Now this was the bill passed under the Clinton administration, right?
Yes, sir.
What are some of the intricate parts between the Clinton administration bill and now this one under Trump administration?
Well, the symmetry has to deal with the mandatory minimums.
Okay.
Now, under Bill Clinton's administration, the climate now was tough on crime. There's too much crime going on. When in actuality, if you would look on the congressional one of those groups, I can't call the name right now, but it does the study. Crime had been steadily going down. You see,
matter of fact, yes, sir.
The violent crime had been steadily going down. What increased was the reporting of it, the visualization as far as TV and whatnot. So they were literally scaring Americans to death.
Oh,
so
okay.
the climate was right. Hey, I'm gonna be tough on crime. So hey, 3 strikes, and you're out. 25 to life, a life sentence based on 3 convictions of a felony, no matter what the felony was. Also, they increased some of the offenses for the death penalty. Now, the mandatory minimum, say you had 2 prior felonies and you might have stolen a loaf of bread or something minor, the judge's hands was tied. He had to give you life or 25-year mandatory sentencing. Well, what that did, it just exploded the prison population. Now, with this new bill that's just passed, it says it lessens the mandatory minimum, but it takes it from 25 to 20 or 20 to 15. So it's really not that much. Again, the problem that has not been addressed is the initial point that you meet the criminal justice system, the sentencing. Now here it is, I just said you're gonna get an extra week off your time. Well, if you got 50 years, that extra week ain't gonna mean nothing to you. See, we got to do something about these enhanced sentences, and that's why I guess they call it the first step. It's a step, but it's a long journey to get there.
Okay, now to back up something you were saying, the National Conference of State Legislatures wrote an article that said the United States prison population have reached 2.2 million people.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And has increased 500% over the past 40 years.
Yes, sir.
But listen to this. It said without a corresponding increase in crime, the United States incarcerates more people per capita than any other nation. So we are saying that the prison population has increased, but the crime has not increased.
Exactly, and this is why I said the reporting of it is increased. We're scaring people to death. You set out some good statistics. I want to say in 1980, there was 319,598 people in prison. And when they took this in 2016, there was 1.5 million. That's just in prison. Then you got 700,000 in jail, another 875,000 on parole, another 3.5 million on probation. That's an enormous amount of people that is tied to the criminal justice system. And here it is in America, a country that gives you the greatest freedom, the land of the free and the home of the brave, but we incarcerate more people in America than the rest of the world combined. That's something we got to really, really look at.
Brothers and sisters, if you're just now tuning in on Facebook Live to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show, I'm here with my brother Kenneth X of the Prison Reform Ministry of the Nation of Islam. We're discussing the new crime bill that was passed on Tuesday night, 87-12, and brother has been kind enough to dissect this bill, to look deep into it and what it means to the black community. Brother, when you're talking about 25 years, life sentences, looking at the psychological effect, the spiritual effect on men who are locked up, does it really make a difference as we start dealing with these bills? A man gets serving 25 years. Now you're saying that within that first crime bill, they pulled out the ability for men to apply for Pell Grant to better themselves.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
But then in that crime bill, they spent $9 billion to increase prisons in the United States.
Yes, sir.
But Trump is fighting for billions of dollars for his wall also.
Yes,
so when you look at this overall bill, and then these men are released back out into the street, what is the effect on the black community, the black family?
Brother, if it wasn't for the grace of God, I don't know where we would be at. For example, during this particular time, that this tough on crime period, there were a lot of subtle things that went on. They increased the time. He put in there truth in sentencing reform, which meant that you had to do 85% minimum or whatever your sentence was. You know, it's really 100%. You can earn good and honor time up to 15%. After that, your behavior, your attendance, your work, none of that matters. So imagine you got 20 years to do and you get your 3 years knocked off that 15%. Now, no matter what you do in prison, it's not going to benefit you. And there's very few people that's motivated enough to do what is necessary to get their lives back. And so the rehabilitative programs, 1995, they took the word rehabilitation out of the Tennessee Department of Corrections to let you know they're not interested in reforming you, rehabilitating you, improving you. When you leave out of those prison gates, you get maybe a $75 check, a pat on the back, and you're on your own. You haven't developed any skills. All of the programs, because this money here that they gave to build the prison had to come from somewhere. They had to cut it from somewhere. So they cut the rehabilitative programs. For example, when you have a felony on your record, it's very difficult to find employment. But there are jobs that you can do and employ yourself. One of the big jobs is janitorial service. So in prison, they teach commercial cleaning, teach you how to mix the chemical composition, how much you need this, the actual skill. You go out on jobs, you do the buffing, you do all of those things. Well, that was one of the classes they cut. They cut the painting class. They cut all these things. Now, they got painters to paint the prison, but as far as teaching the class, getting the skill, getting the certification, able to leave prison and go to a vocational school and really take that and provide a way of life for yourself, all of that is gone. So 5 years go by now, nothing. 10 years go by, you're doing nothing. 15 years go by, now it's time for you to leave. Right back to the same community that you came in. And what are you going back out there with? Nothing. What are you going to do when you get there? Very little. So the probability of you returning to prison is very high. In fact, the recidivism rate is nearly 6 out of 10 guys. Or maybe even more now, but 6 out of 10 people that's released from prison find their way back.
All right. Now, brothers and sisters, if you are keeping up with the current events in the news, as it relate to prison reform, we see that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam is in a controversy with the Jews. They are looking for ways to hinder our growth, particularly in the prison reform ministry. Recent articles have come out and they stated that the Nation of Islam is receiving federal funding from the government. Well, let me explain that, because I'm a prison reform minister and you're a prison reform minister. I don't get any money.
No, sir.
It's volunteer. But there are some chaplains that
Yes,
they
sir.
give them stipends,
Yes, sir.
to help them with their travel. Some of these brothers travel 2 and 3 hours to prison.
Yes, sir.
They leave their jobs. So, but when you see the Nation of Islam work in the prison and the prison reform ministry, now, as you were speaking now, they're building more prison, but they're saying they're reforming the system. So they're planning for more men to come into the prison, and those who come out return back.
Yes, sir.
They're taking out every chance for you to reform yourself in the prison. They don't want the Nation of Islam in the prison reform ministry. So them actually putting pressure on the government to stop funding our self-improvement, the basis for community development work within the prison. Don't stop us from going to the prison.
Right.
Because money is not our motive.
Exactly. That's correct. That is correct. You know, it is a outright shame to, on one hand, say you have a problem, and then you see something that works, and then don't even want to allow that program that works the best inside your institution. It makes no sense. I sit here, Brother James, as a direct product of Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry. In 1993, I was sentenced to life in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. I just want you to let that sink in. Life. As a young man, in my early 20s. So imagine the psychological trauma that puts you under. Not to mention that 99% of the men that's in there did what they did out of a sense of desperation, or had some kind of addiction or whatnot, trying to get some money. Not making that as an excuse, but what I'm saying, they're not hard criminals, hard-hearted people. So the crime that they done is on their mind. It messes with their psyche. There's not one counsel, there's not one program that allows you to discuss that, to have some kind of therapy. So you got to live with that every day, and also live with your time. She say, this is your reality. Now you can medicate yourself on it so long. There's several coping mechanisms, but the reality is you got to wake up every day in a cell. That's a bad thing. So I've seen brothers literally go crazy. Some may make extremely violent. But the point I'm making is this. When the Nation of Islam prison reform ministers come in, they'll bring books. They have a kind word. They left a tape. The thing that got me wasn't the minister that I saw. It was a tape that I heard. He had left a tape with Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I'm sitting in there just really killing time, something to do. But he said something that resonated that day. And he said that there is no human being that cannot be redeemed. And I said, wow, here I am at the lowest of the low, the lowest point of my life. All my dreams, all my aspirations. At that time, I said, man, it's gone. What a waste of talent. I just hear people talking about me in the past tense. I'm like, I'm still alive. But in their eyes, you were dead. And so here's a man that had a word that touched me, that allowed me to move from where I was, a sense of hopelessness, a sense of desperation, to find some value in myself in that hellish condition. That's powerful, brother. And this was the self-improvement study guides. I read and I started applying the method of self-correction, self-analysis, self-examination, and it changed my life. It motivated me to try to change the lives of others. And this is why when brothers come in, we should run to those services. Every brother that was exposed to the word, and the volunteers that come free, the brothers from Muhammad's Mosque number 60, which is in Nashville, would come to West Tennessee. They would come all over and give a word. So,
for free.
For free. You know, so this money that's being given out, that's just a sham. That's a game. Now, the chaplaincy is mandated to provide for the religious needs of inmate. Sometimes the chaplain, 9 times out of 10, he's of the Christian faith, so he may need a Muslim imam or a minister to come in. And if that position pays, then if there's citizens in America in good standing, last I checked, servitude, slavery, and involuntary servitude was abolished. So they're supposed to get paid if that's a paying position. But the volunteers, the point I'm making, they don't do it for the money, because it probably wouldn't even cover the gas that it takes. And then you know for your facts for yourself, Brother James, you've been there, knocked on the door, and they tell you you can't get in. There's a running joke say, this is the only place a black man can't get in prison, is when he's trying to come in and teach or share a good word. So the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry is, without question, the #1 program in salvaging the lives of the brothers that's on the inside. It's not even close.
Brothers and sisters, if you're just now tuning in to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show, I'm sitting here with Brother Kenneth X of the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry, and we're discussing the new crime bill. Now, as you were speaking, brother, about the process of the Nation of Islam coming into the prison, within this crime bill, they're dealing with finance. Many ministers went and sat down with Trump and gave their opinion, but the Nation of Islam wasn't at that table. When it comes to our community, the Nation of Islam should be at every table, because you just gave a testimony. The little money that they might give to some volunteer chaplains for coming in is nothing compared to what they pay chaplains, because I know going into the prison, brother, they will offer the chaplains, Christian chaplains, finance for coming in.
Yes, sir.
But when it came to the Nation of Islam,
no money.
We have no money.
No money.
It's not in the budget.
Right.
But that didn't stop us.
No, sir.
But we have a record of true reform that is not included in the crime bill when we read it.
Yes,
now, when we're dealing with this crime bill, let's get back to this crime bill now.
Yes,
are there other parts of the crime bill that the black community should know about, particularly these young mothers who have sons in jail and husbands in jail, and now increasing number of women in jail?
Yes, sir. Also. Yes, sir. When you said that about the women, I want to touch on that first, because that was one of the things I wanted to point out. That in 1980, there was only 13,206 women behind bars. And in 2016, when this study was done, there were over 111,422 women.
Go back to that number again.
13,000 in
what year?
1980. 1980. 13,206 women. And in 2016, 111,442,000. According to the government statistics, this is from the Sentencing Project. This is no thing the Nation of Islam put out. All of these numbers come from the Department of Justice. That is a massive increase. And what are you finding now? That they're making a concerted effort to incarcerate more women. And this is ludicrous. One of the things that's in the new crime bill that I want to mention is, many didn't know, but some of the sisters, when they come in, they be with child. And when they're going through that labor, they're actually handcuffed and shackled. Can you imagine? You now have enough sense of human decency. A woman's sitting there with travails of birth pain, and she's shackled. Her ankles and hands. This is ludicrous. So what they've done, they're saying they made it illegal to shackle a pregnant woman, but there are loopholes in it where you can restrain her. See, you always got to look at the language, Brother Jan. You can restrain her. So we have to be mindful of those things. But again, with this crime bill, brother, is a lot that we need to be aware of, because in the black community, again, I want to stress this. This bill is for federal institutions only. Most of the people that is incarcerated are in state prisons or the local jails. That's 87%. So you got 100 people in a cage, and someone came in and said, "Hey, I got 13 names I can let out." I don't think you ought to be calling no press conference. I don't think that's room for no parade. Yeah, it's good the 13 got out, but what about the other 87? You see, we got to address the whole thing, unless we're dealing with it on the front end. See, the hoopla is this. They have miscalculated. See, they didn't give these individuals nothing. They were supposed to get 54 days a year anyway, federal institution. But they were only getting 47. So now this is going to be given to them. It's going to be applied retroactively, which means that everybody in the institution is going to get those 7 days. That's going to give some individuals the opportunity to get out immediately. But once that happens and once that's over with, it's back to business as usual. There's 1,700 men that's released from prison every day. All you did is added about 3 more days to that. That's
okay,
it.
now, in closing, is there an increasing number of more people going into the private institution now also?
The thing is this, when you talked about the funding to build the jails, who benefited from that funding? This gave rise to the privatization of the prison industrial complex. Now, if you look in this bill, I wish we had time to go into it, I would have fine-tooth comb. The private institutions now, that were facing a lot of flack because written in a lot of the state legislators, go back and research this, that in the laws, that these private facilities must have 90% occupancy or they can charge the state, some up to $2 million, most $1 million. So they benefit by the number of people they have incarcerated. So if you got stock in this as CCA or it's Core Civic now, and you're a judge, you trying to improve your stock, you giving extra time, you on a parole board, God does his time, and that's the thing about it. You can get good time, and once you max out, your sentence stops if you go so long. But if you go to the parole board and they turn you down, now you're doing what they call dead time. You've maxed out, according to the Department of Correction, with your good behavior. Your paperwork say you're a model inmate. But here it is, they turn you down for 2 years. So now what do? You're just sitting there, you're stuck. Now, in this bill, again, I know we got to wrap it up. The Attorney General has probably the most important role because it is him that institute most of the policies and make sure that they go through. So what if you got a racist Attorney General? What if you got an Attorney General that has that tough on crime mentality, to lock them up, throw away the key mentality? Some of this stuff's not even going to get implemented. And the rehabilitative programs that allow you to get this extra good time, the private facilities, the privatization of these services, that's going to go in the hands of some of their best friends. So it's one hand looking at the other, making it seem like we're giving the public something, but really we putting this money in our own pocket. And that's what we're doing, because all of these rehabilitative programs, they're going to have somebody come in and give the class. For example, when I was in prison, they had a class that started off thinking for a change. Then it came life without a crutch. Then it became pre-release. Then it was called release for success. Then it was called pro-social skills. Then it was called cognitive behavior intervention program. But the book was the same. They renamed it 7 different times, but had the same book. Come on, man, this is a joke. And this is what they actually do. I know what the paper's saying, and I know we can get caught up in it, but trust me, I did nearly 26 years. If there's anything I know is the penitentiary system. And this stuff here, it looks good on paper, but the funding, $50 million. You know, again, that's on one of them pages you couldn't read. Over the next 10 years, they're spreading it out. You can't do nothing with that kind of money. It's just a drop in the bucket, right?
Well, brother, you named many different programs, but it was one program that changed you. And it's called Self-Improvement, the basis for community development study guides. Now, the government is moving to stop the Nation of Islam from coming into the prison.
Yes, sir.
And we're coming in, we're not under contract. I don't leave Whiteville or 201 Poplar with a check in my pocket. So brothers and sisters, we thank you for tuning in once again to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show. This is part 1 on the crime bill. My brother Kenneth will be back. Am I right, brother?
Yes, sir.
And he's going to look deeply into the crime bill and also the prison reform ministry, so you now can know what to expect as it relates to your relatives that are incarcerated within prison, because we are the voice of the community, the Self-Improvement Talk Show. So until next week, brothers and sisters, peace be unto you.